Happy to be here in Fort St. John. I didn't know it was a holiday destination in February. It's pretty nice out there. So yeah, my name is Stewart. I ranch in southwest Saskatchewan in Morse. I ranch with my wife and our daughters and my wife's parents. So in our place, we're mostly native grass, a little bit of tame grass, and then a half section we farm. We have been seeding polycrops in the past for silage. So we're part of the Central Prairies Living Labs. Our main focus is improving management on our native grazing to help promote the species at risk that call that home. We are a yearling and cow-calf operation. We run Hereford and Angus cows. So, like I said, we're mostly native grass, and that was a huge interest to us when we moved out there. It's such an interesting ecosystem, and all the animals that live there. So, a fun fact about me. So, what is mental health? Mental health is our emotional, psychological, and social well-being affecting how we think, feel, and act. Mental and physical health are equally important contributors to overall well-being. What is stress? Stress is a normal human reaction that everyone experiences on a daily basis. When you experience changes or challenges, also known as stressors, your body produces both physical and mental responses. These responses are designed to help us survive and adjust to new situations. But if you experience long periods of stress without relief, problems can occur. So, factors affecting stress on the farm. Anyone think of any? Here's a few on this list, and guess how many we can control. Odette, do you want to get some answers out of these people?
Just surprised I'm not on that list.
So you could argue none of these we can control, yet we spend a lot of time worrying about them. So what I try and focus on is the only thing in life we can control is our reaction to it. So here's this. I'm going to get into my mental health story. A warning, it's going to suicide is going to come up as long as some other sensitive topics. So if you feel the need to leave the room, by all means, feel free. If I forget to mention it later, there are handouts at the back of the room from Do More Ag. They have a lot of resources for producers. Also, I'm not a mental health professional. I'm a person with lived experiences. So if you do need further help, make sure you seek out the resources available. So, I was born in Smithers, BC in '89. For those of you doing the quick math in your head, that was not 19 years ago, that was actually 35 years ago. So my parents moved up there for work. My brother and I were born up there, my younger brother. And then in '92, my parents moved to Kamloops. They had family down there, and so it made more sense to raise us down there and be closer to their family. My sister was born there, and a big part of growing up for us was rodeoing. My parents made a huge effort to pack us to the rodeos. Dad built us a practice arena, so we spent 4 days a week there after school. They always kept good horses for us and kept us out of trouble. So when my brother and sister and I, we all started Gymkhanas and then Little Britches, worked up to high school rodeo. In high school, I rode bulls, team roped, and calf roped. If it was up to me, I would have only rode bulls. That was my main interest. But my parents told me if they were packing me all them miles, I was doing more than one event. Which it turns out was very helpful later on. Since ranching, I've used roping a lot more than I have riding bulls. So after high school, I got a bull riding scholarship to a school in Montana. I went there for one season. There was luckily 4 of us from BC who all had rodeoed together in the past, and we were all roommates, and so that helped us all settle in together. So when we were back home in Canada for the summer, we went rodeoing up here, and then when school started back again, we were going to head back down south. We were at a rodeo in Drumheller, and I ended up getting in a bad wreck. I got hung up to a bull, and if you're not familiar what that means, I had come off, my hand was still in the rope, and I was getting kind of drugged beside him. And one time he had kicked, and when his feet come down, one went on the back of my head, and the other one into my back, which got me unhung from the rope, but it also mashed me in the ground pretty good. So I spent 3 days in the hospital after that, and sports medicine told me that take 3 months off and we'll reassess you and see when you can come back. So that was my 8th concussion in 9 years. I had my first one when I was 10 years old riding steers, and a few more along the way. So they were conscious of that, so they wanted to do a CAT scan at the end to see how my brain was doing, and then they would tell me if I should wait longer or if I was able to ride again. So about 2.5 months rolled around, and I made the call myself that I wasn't going to be riding again. I had horrible memory loss, light sensitivity, mood swings, dizziness, and things had changed quite dramatically for me. So I made the call to not ride bulls anymore. So I was 19 at that time, and you can imagine what a mental strain that was. From a young age up until that point, that was all I'd wanted to do, and then it was myself that made the call not to. There was a long time where I couldn't watch rodeo. I wanted nothing to do with rodeo, and I was in a bit of a rough place. So a friend of mine's dad had heard that I wasn't rodeoing anymore and I was looking for work. That friend of mine was Ty Posabon. In this picture, I'm in the blue shirt. The one with the sunglasses beside me is Ty. Ty was 2 years younger than me, and he would go on to be one of the most phenomenal riders to come out of Canada. And so anyways, his dad got a hold of me when he had heard that I was done rodeoing and asked if I wanted a job logging. So I went logging for the same company as Luke. And when we started logging, it was between Kamloops and Merritt, and I was living at Mom and Dad's at that time, so it made most sense. I just kept living at Mom and Dad's, and I'd travel to the bush from there. And then they moved me, we started logging more in Merritt, and so it was going to be a way longer drive. So it made more sense to live in Merritt, cut down on the commute. So Luke suggested I get a hold of his nephew, Derek, to see if I could live with Derek while I found a place to live. So Derek had just gotten married the year before. He was 8 years older than me, and what a good test for a marriage to have a 19-year-old ex-bull rider live with you for an undisclosed amount of time. But it was a very crucial part of my life, and Derek, also being in the logging industry, showed me the way around it, my way through the community, how to be an adult, and he helped me get my Class 1, got me calf roping again. We went rodeoing, and they also introduced me to my wife, Erica. So when I met her, she had just come back from the U of S. She got her teaching degree, and she was a part-time teacher. Her other part-time job was working on her family's ranch, which was south of Merritt. So her family had moved there in 1962, and at that time, they were basically the only ones at that end of the valley. That was before the Coquihalla Highway went in. That was before acreages started coming up. That was before the pipelines went in. And that picture in the top right corner, you can see them cows are on the pipeline right away. And you can see in the distance, that's where we're going, is we use them right aways quite often to move cattle on them ranges. So that range was 96,000 acres or 150 sections. And it had the Coquihalla Highway going right to the middle of it by this time. And you would think that since the highway went through it, it would be two different fields. But because it crossed the river, or the highway crossed the river, there was 9 bridges that cattle could work back and forth through. So it was just one big field, basically. So there was a lot of time spent riding, moving cows out, and from home to the back end of the range was 80 miles. So we'd spend a month pushing out in the spring, and then 6 weeks bringing home in the fall. So there was a lot of challenges in this place. Another thing we did every fall was look for strays. We'd rent a helicopter and go look for stuff that hadn't come home yet, and then haul out, trail them home. So there was a lot of challenges with this place. By this time, Erica had been involved in Canadian Cattlemen's, their youth programs, and she had met some people from Alberta, Saskatchewan, who explained a different way to do things. Being in the prairies, you got a bit more management options. You know, we were facing lots of urban pressure from acreages that are popping up everywhere, and none of them seemed to know how to build a fence to keep cows out. Lack of rights on our range permit. So on any given weekend, there would be 1,000 people camped on our range, and there was nothing we had no jurisdiction to say you can't camp here or things like that. And it wasn't a government monitored site, so garbage was left everywhere, nothing was picked up. It was just horrible. Cows were getting shot in the hunting season. It was a lot of lack of control. We had to calve early February. Them calves had to be big enough to head to the mountains by May. And then, of course, your marketing options are limited because you've only got a small window to bring stuff home. Pulling bulls was next to impossible. You can imagine finding 20 bulls on 150 sections and then having a place to load them. And you know what bulls are like moving in July. Flooding, since we crossed the river 9 times with them cows to bring them home, we were always worried about flooding in the fall and not being able to bring them across. And then, of course, forest fires with all the people camped out there. There was always that worry. And the workload going forward, there was no way that Eric and I figured we could, do that ourselves. We got married in 2014 and in July, and we were very planned out people, and we wanted to have a family one day, and so we started doing the math on, we had the window between calving and haying, which was May to June, or we had after weaning before calving, December, January. So you go into your gestation table in your calving book, and you think, it's July now, we better get started now. So like any good cow, she caught right away. And we had our first daughter, Macy June, on May 29th, 2017. Or sorry, not 17, 15. So 2016, we started looking at places in Saskatchewan, just Saskatchewan. And we listed our place in Merritt. It sold that fall, and we still hadn't found a place to move to. So the possession date of our place was May 1st. So this is coming into the fall of 16. We had to be out, all the cows out, everything by the end of April. So I went on a last hunt mission to find a place. And by this time, since we'd been looking for a couple of years, we had made a lot of contacts. And I've come across a few places to go look at. So in a last-ditch effort in January, I made a tour, and I found this place. So it was fairly run down. It hadn't been looked after for like a whole generation, but it was 30 miles from Lake Diefenbaker, 2 hours from Regina, 7 miles off the highway, an hour to Swift Current, an hour to Moose Jaw, 2.5 hours to the U.S. border, situated really nicely. The land base was there. It was mostly native grass, which is what we were looking for. And so the work and the cleanup and the building, we were, excited to do. We could build it how we wanted going forward. So on my way home from looking at this place, it was January 9th, 2017. I'm driving home. I'm between Golden and Revelstoke, and I get a phone call from my brother. He called to tell me that Ty Posbon had passed away. He later found out he'd committed suicide. He was a month after coming off the PBR World Finals and finishing in the top 10. He'd married his wife that year. He had just bought a place in Merritt, their own acreage. And to find all this out, that he'd come off of all that to thinking that that was his only option was mind-boggling to me. So this is what initiated my advocacy for mental health. No one should feel like they're in that place and that was their only option. So after the funeral, we went to dealing on this place and we ended up getting it. So April of 17, I left Merritt in that pickup and trailer. I had 2 horses in the back and all the essentials of living as a bachelor for 2 weeks. The plan was I'd go over first, I'd get things set up to receive cattle, and Erica and her parents would start sending stuff. So calving in February, we're shipping pairs over by April, and as we got closer to our moving date, we would vaccinate one liner load of calves, and we'd keep them separate, and then a couple of days later do another load of calves. So they were all staggered, and they were all sorted prior to. So a day of shipping, you could just bring that field in, load them on, and away they went. So I had made previous arrangements with a friend of mine from Maple Creek. He was going to come over and give me a hand getting set up for 2 weeks. We had a week before trucks started showing up. And then he had enough time to help me for 2 weeks. And so this was the first load of equipment to go over. We had 5 flat deck loads went over total. So notice the tractor on there. That was the pound post because we pulled the post pounder. There's some panels on there because there was absolutely no fences on this place that would hold anything. And then the quad for fence. And that was our main priority, was get some fences built. So that's what we did for a week straight, was try and build fences that mountain cows would not run through. So if you can think, our cows are used to pushing through deadfall in the bush, and these fences that were here were 2 and 3 strand barbed wire, not hot, this high. So our cows would, they cross the river. So like this picture on the left is a slough on the property line, and they basically just run the fence into the slough. Good enough. Probably for prairie cows it was. But, we had to fence through sloughs. We had to put a third wire where there was only 2, things like that. And then we started receiving cattle. So there was a 14-hour liner haul, and we sent over 7 loads, and we doctored 1 calf through that whole deal. That was far better than what we were prepared for, but it all went super well. And then after this, my friend and I had to go back to his place to get his stuff done. And then I was there on my own. There's still a couple more loads of cattle to come. And I'm talking to my father-in-law one day in the yard. It's just me here now. And at this place, the last mile of our road, the road ends in our driveway. So if you're coming to our place, you have to deliberately show up there. You don't just drive past accidentally. So I'm talking on the phone with my father-in-law. I'm telling him a few things I need on the next load of stuff to come over. And I hear this vehicle coming up the road. And I'm on the phone, and I said, I can hear a pickup. It's the weirdest thing. And I got looking at the skyline, and I can see a pickup coming. And I said, geez, it looks a lot like my pickup. And my father-in-law, he starts laughing pretty hard. And it comes closer, and I said, that is my pickup. And my sister had surprised me. She drove this pickup over. Her and my father-in-law loaded her up, as you can see, and she drove it over. She had been living with us for 6 months before we moved. She was a nurse in Merritt, and so she was staying with us, and so that was a pretty neat surprise. I was feeling alone for a day or two, and then she showed up. Later that week, Erica and Macy, they flew over. Most of our stuff was there by now. These 2 pictures, they're really important to me. This is like our turning point. For the past 3 years, we'd been dreaming about this moment. We had this new ranch, and it was full of opportunity, of opportunity to implement these new management practices we want to, which we couldn't in BC. So at this time, it was just the 3 of us. Erica's parents, they stayed back in Merritt. Her mom worked for the school division, so she was going to finish out the school year and then retire, and then they would come over. So these few days, they were some of the best days that we had. We would spend every day riding, and then build fence, get stuff built, meet neighbors, start to fit in the area. One evening, we were out at a fundraiser supper, and we got home from that. We were sitting in the driveway, and my daughter, Macy, she must have been saying something to me, giving me a hard time. So I reached back to grab her knee to tickle her, how you do with small kids. And when I felt her knee, her legs, it felt swollen. So we went in the house to get a better look at it, and it sure as heck was swollen. We had no idea how or why. So I called my sister, who was a nurse, and asked what we should do. My sister suggested wait until the morning to see if it was still swollen. So we did that, and by morning it was still swelled up and maybe even worse. So we went to the hospital in Swift Current, see what was going on. They couldn't figure anything out. So by this time, I had called my in-laws and asked if they could come over to look after things, because we didn't know how long this was going to take. We'd be away from home. And the people in Swift Current ended up sending us to Saskatoon to do a better job of assessing Macy. And so we were there for 10 days while we waited for them to figure out what was going on. So day 8, they did a biopsy on her leg where it was swollen, and it come back as cancerous. And it was a real aggressive type of cancer called rhabdomyosarcoma, and they wanted to start a treatment protocol right away. 54 weeks, every week, chemo and or radiation. So there went our plans like that of starting a new place and being on it every day. So we got, and we still had to get buildings put up, water infrastructure in before winter. We wanted to get a shop up, a horse barn, calving barn, and we needed, like I said, the winter water infrastructure. So when we weren't at the hospital, we were home getting stuff ready, getting stuff built. And by this time, you know, Macy's going through treatment, and it amazes me how well she handled everything. It didn't matter what we were doing, she was out there with us, and just she had an amazing attitude through it all. We ended up getting everything done we wanted before winter. So at the hospital, some of the weeks we would stay for the whole week. They would treat her as an inpatient, and that was hell on us because we were used to being outside every day. They would, you know, basically locked us in a room while she got her chemo. We couldn't leave the room while she was getting her chemo, but she had to be on an IV pump all day because when they weren't running chemo through her, they were running liquid through her. So we rigged up a way to still get outside and be hooked up to this thing. So this IV pump pole on the left there, it put a lot of miles on through that. Like the wheels were shaking like a bugger on it by the time we got done with it. And then we got smart and rigged up this deal on the right. We put the IV pump right on the stroller, and we could really put some miles on. That hospital in Saskatoon was right on the river, so we could walk down there and walk along the river. And then when it started getting colder out, one day we asked the nurses, we're like, what temperature is this stuff freeze at? And they're like, I don't know. No one's ever asked us that before. So we would rig up blankets and insulate that best we could, still get outside every day and get some miles on, and so that's what we did there. But even, you know, through it all, every time we were home, you know, Macy was with us, and she was doing everything we did. For the amount of stuff they were running through her and how she should have felt, and she never weakened whatsoever. You know, this is after a full day of treatment. She still wanted to go to the playground and play. So that was, you know, at that time, that was very inspiring to Eric and I that she would still do this, even though she was getting the worst of it. So April of 18, Macy was declared cancer-free, but because of the type of cancer it was, they wanted to continue with the full treatment protocol, which took us to August, or last week of July. So that time come around, and that was our, you know, that was what we had our sights on, is that day we could get back to being at home every day and, you know, work in this new place like we'd hoped. So the first week of August, we were home, and Macy wasn't feeling real well, and we ended up taking her to the Regina Hospital, and they couldn't get her vitals stabilized. They were all over the place, and they couldn't figure out what was causing it. So they airlifted her to Saskatoon, and then, you know, they had better resources there, and that's where our oncologist was. And in that air ambulance, there wasn't enough room for me, so Erica went with Macy, and then the team of nurses and doctors were in there. Then I drove up. I met them there that evening at the pediatric intensive care unit, and we met with the oncologist. He was this little guy, and he was very good at his job. You can imagine what kind of job that would be when you deal with childhood cancer every day. Every time he talked to you, he had a straight face. He gave you the facts. He didn't BS you. But he had lacked emotion like crazy, which I think you would have to in that job. But that night, when we showed up, he was like 5 feet off the ground, happier than hell. He's like, we're going to get this figured out. This is something trivial. And then next couple of days, you guys will be in the monitoring ward or the observation ward, and you'll be gone. We'll figure this out. So that night, we went to sleep. Erica always slept with Macy in the hospital bed, and I got the iconic chair/bed in the hotel or in the hospital room. So for whatever reason, that night I went to sleep with all my clothes on. I just hopped on this chair and went to sleep. 3 o'clock that morning, we were woke up to alarms going off and nursing staff rushing in. They lost her heart rate, and she passed away at 3 o'clock that morning. So we were fairly devastated, obviously. We left the hospital that morning, and we thought, well, we're going to be probably hunkered in at home for a while. We should probably stop and get some groceries. We hadn't been home for 5 days, too. So I'll probably always remember this, but we go in the grocery store and we put our items on the till. And the lady at the till, they always say, "How's your morning going?" And it was all I could do to say, "Oh, just fine, thanks." But, I learned from that, and that you never want to judge someone by looking at them or know what's going on with them, because you never know. So we got home, and we had the funeral. And at the funeral, I had a friend come up to me, and he said, "You guys have a lot of distraction here now with how many people are here." He said, me and my wife are going to come out in a few months and give you another distraction. So they did. And this friend of mine who came out, I'd rodeoed with him since I was 10 years old. I knew him really well. He was someone I looked up to a lot. He'd made it on tour riding bulls. He was the top of his Red Seal class as a carpenter. He was a hell of a husband, hell of a father, just an all-around good guy. So one evening we're standing in the shop, and he tells me, he says, "You should watch yourself, how you're reacting to losing Macy." And I said, "Oh yeah, I'll figure it out, like we all do when we have to do something, right? We figure out how to do it." And in that, his next sentence he said how he had been dealing with anxiety and depression. And that hit me, come out of nowhere. I thought, how could this guy who from the outside has everything together, and he's dealing with something? So it didn't really sink in right away. Like I said, I was going to figure it out myself, which meant drinking enough as I could to fall asleep at night, and then just getting through the days. I forgot to mention, this is a really key point. When we lost Macy, Erica was 3 months pregnant. By some stroke of luck, don't get me wrong, I know how a baby is made, I understand that, but we weren't trying, it just had happened. And that is something we were very thankful for every day. So, me dealing with this myself, I finally got to a really low point, and I did seek out a grievance counselor, and also worked with a brain injury specialist. And we worked through a lot of stuff and got me back on track, because I knew I had to be there for Erica and our next baby. So in March of 2018, we had Hazel, our middle daughter, and that helped fill a huge hole for Erica and I. And like in true fashion, my sister showed up, being super auntie that she was, and we finally felt a little bit more whole again. That year, that fall, my sister called me one day. She had went in to get a mole removed. And being a nurse, the proper thing to do there is to get a biopsy done on it, and it come back as cancerous. With the outcome looking really promising, it was a pretty typical type of cancer. Treatment was very non-invasive, and it looked very promising. So she continued on with that, and the next year, this is Macy. We were finally doing stuff together again as a family. Her being a bull rider. And then in 20, we had our youngest daughter, Risa. By this time, my sister, she'd done all her treatment. She was recovered fine. She was just getting back to work as a nurse. So since it's a nurses union, when you come back to work from something like that, they put you to work at somewhat of a lower capacity until you work up to being full-time. So she was going through that at that time and was doing really well at it. And then, us at home, we were in our glory. We were just starting to not bubble wrap our kids, because as you can imagine, from this point on, every scratch, every bruise, every whatever, you assume the worst from what had happened earlier. So Eric and I were just starting to feel like normal parents again. And I got a call from my sister. It was March of 22. I was clearing out snow out of the corrals because we were starting to calve in a couple weeks, sorry. My sister called me and said, my cancer is back and it's terminal. They just gave me 6 months to live. And so all these emotions of everything that we'd gone through in the last few years come raining back on you. And we went back to BC to see her a few times that year. The last visit we went over in August. And by this time, my sister was at mom and dad's. They had a hospital bed for her there. And she had had a stroke by this time too. So her left side, she was paralyzed on her left side. So anything like going to the washroom, eating, she needed help from either mom and dad or me or whoever was there. And I ended up staying a week longer than Erica and the kids. They went back home and I stayed to help mom and dad with my sister. And my sister, she was someone who lived life to the fullest. I mean, she'd been bungee jumping. She traveled all over and she had a pretty good sense of humor. So when at night, my parents would sleep on the couches beside her hospital bed in case she had to go to the washroom. And then they'd help her in a wheelchair, stroll her off to the washroom, do her business, and back to the bed. So it was quite a big job to get something simple like that done. And I remember one night, my sister wakes up mom and dad, says, I got to go to the washroom. So they do the whole procedure, get her wheeled to the washroom, get her back to bed. She gets tucked in. A few minutes later, she goes, I got to go to the washroom again. So they do the whole deal again. So this is like a half an hour later. They get her back into the bed the second time. She waits 5 minutes, and she said, Mom and Dad, I got to go to the washroom. And Mom said, are you serious? And she says, no, I'm just messing with you. The last week I spent with her, I spent a lot of time next to her at her hospital bed, looking at her, knowing her time was limited, and she couldn't even enjoy it. And for me, that really put things in perspective of when times get rough as a producer, how bad is it in comparison to something like this? The drought that we were going through really didn't seem that bad in comparison. So I always try and think about that. She ended up passing away a week later at 28 years old. So what I learned from these unfortunate events, try and slow down and find something to enjoy every day. They are out there. Also, everyone has their bad days. So when you have yours, don't be afraid to reach out. And take time to be with the people who you enjoy. For Erica and I, it's being with our daughters at home. And we do everything together. And for me, I feel it's important to know what your end goal is as a producer. For us, it's to maintain this place that we ranch and give it in a better condition to the next generation. And to me, that makes it all worth it. So I read an article, and it had these examples of headstones in them, and I thought this was kind of humorous. I could relate to what they were saying, but I also thought it put things in perspective. Because when you read it, it really doesn't seem like a very big deal. But how many of you can relate to them? Your failures are not going to be how you are remembered. just keep that in mind. We all make mistakes, and we learn from them. If anyone needs, Dumar Ag has some really good resources. There's their link to their website, FCC, Canadian Mental Health Association, and the Canadian Centre for Health and Safety in Agriculture. There's my contact info if anyone needs to get a hold of me. That's right. Thank you.